Marvel and DC, Peter Parker's brother becomes the strongest hero across the multiverse. Episode 61. Tony's Gift. After hearing Stark call himself a big fool, Thor also came to his senses. He is just sad, not really stupid. He shouted loudly. Hey mortal, watch your words. I am the son of Odin, the prince of Asgard, and the god of thunder, Thor. After a series of names were announced, Thor glared at Stark. However, he didn't take action this time. Mainly because Luya put so much pressure on him that he no longer dared to underestimate others. Well, originally, Stark just made a joke and explained the meaning of the lore. But after hearing such a long list of names that Sol gave himself, he began to really doubt Sol's IQ. Dude, are you serious? As he said that, Stark looked at Luya and said suspiciously. I remember there is a saying in a small area under our country, what is it called, Chinibyu? Hearing Stark's doubts, Luya smiled and shook his head. Tony. What if I told you what he just said was true? Real? How is this possible? Stark turned to look at Pepper. Pepper also showed an expression of complete disbelief. So, Stark patted Lua on the shoulder. Lua, this joke is quite cold. But having said that, Stark actually felt a little uneasy in his heart. Fury contacted Stark after his falling out with Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff. He told him about his difficulties and expressed his intention to invite him to join the Avengers. One of the reasons for the invitation is the alien civilization. However, Stark didn't believe it at first. Now, looking at Luya's serious expression, he had to consider again whether alien civilization really existed. It's just that Thor's current appearance doesn't look like the legendary Thor, does he? Stark is a little confused about this guy who calls himself Thor. Although the whole body has a bit of momentum, it's not much. And it seems that he is still a little afraid of Luya? Tony. Luya pulled up a chair and sat down, explaining. Gods are real. That's right. Thor nodded in agreement. There are still smart people in this backward place like Midgard. Of course. Luya glanced at Sol. When I say gods, I don't mean weaklings like this. In Luya's opinion, in the Marvel world, those who can truly be called gods should be like the 5 creation gods. Or, like the ancient god Gaia, who is said to have created Asgard. Of course, Luya expressed doubts about whether humans were created by Gaia. Anyway, after hearing that Luya also denied his identity as a god, Thor eagerly wanted to refute. Since you acknowledge my identity as Thor, why do you refute that I am a god? At this stage, Thor regards identity as extremely important, and Thor's identity is the source of his pride. Of course not a god. Luya shook his head. If nothing else, we have many people in Midgard who can defeat you. Then do you think that a god would be as weak as you and would be defeated by a so-called mortal? Then, Luya turned to Stark and Pepper and explained. Midgard is what the Asgardians call our Earth. When Luya said that there were many people in Midgard who were stronger than him, Thor's face became more suspicious. In his opinion, Luya should be the ceiling of Midgard's combat power, a guardian, a god of war, and the like. Now, there are others who are better than me, how is this possible? Luya smiled, he knew what Sol was thinking. But that's the way it is. For example, taking Ancient One and Thorby, they are too bullying. Typical, Hulk. Let's not talk about Hulk's performance in the comics. It's a trivial matter for Hulk to blow up stars with one punch, let alone the immortal Hulk and so on. As far as the Hulk's expressiveness in the movie is concerned, he is already ridiculously strong and represents pure power. As far as Asgardians are concerned, your advantage is that your lifespan is relatively long, and your physical fitness in all aspects is indeed much stronger than that of us Midgardians. But other than that, most Asgardians aren't actually that ridiculously strong, are they? After all, your strength also depends on your bloodline. As for you not believing that there are many people in Midgard who can defeat you, it doesn't matter, you will see them later. Or, when you find your divine power, I will fight you again. Thor inherited the blood of Odin, and in Luya's view, he is one of the important members to fight against Thanos in the future. Although he said that Thor was not a god, he did have the blood of a god flowing in his body, which was true. Okay, Luya. Although Stark still can't accept the existence of alien civilization. But then I thought about it, even Superman-like guys like Luya appeared, so it's not surprising that alien civilization might appear. By the way, I have prepared a gift for you in the past 2 days. With that said, Stark stood up and led Luya towards his laboratory. What kind of god is that? Come and see it too. It's Thor. Sol emphasized his name and raised his legs to follow. Laboratory. Looking at the various metal parts everywhere, Luya knew that this should be the place where Stark developed the Mark armor. Sure enough, the next moment, Stark said, "Jarvis. Sir, do you need any help?" The elegant and magnetic voice came. It was Stark's artificial intelligence. "Jarvis. Take out the gift I prepared for Luya." "Okay, sir." The voice fell. Several mechanical arms stretched out. The various parts in red, yellow, and silver colors are being assembled quickly. Thanks to Luya's reminder, the Mark 6 armor was released ahead of schedule. Of course, because of this, compared to the movie, the Mark 6 at this time has many more restrictions and problems. Therefore, it looks a little different than in the movie. But the most critical change, the inverted triangular reactor on the chest, which is the third-generation reactor, is still so handsome. In just over a minute, the armor was assembled. How about it? The Mark 6 is paired with my third-generation reactor, which replaces the palladium element with a new element. Of course, Luya is not too afraid of radiation. Looking at the classic color scheme of the Mark 6, the corners of Luya's lips raised, and he looked at Stark and thanked him sincerely. "Thank you, Tony, I like this gift very much. The previous generations of armor were too stupid, and after the nanomaterial armor was introduced, it lost the metallic feel of the armor. In the original movie, Luya's favorite armor was the Mark 6. As long as you like it." Stark laughed very proudly. Who would be unhappy if his invention was recognized by others? Episode 62. Hulk and Hatred. Time passes little by little. In the space of a month, a few things happened in New York. The first is the rumors about Iron Man Stark. Because of the development of improved third-generation reactors and Mark 6, Iron Man has been out of people's sight for a while. And just when people were speculating that something was wrong with Stark, wearing a full version of Mark 6, appeared at the press conference and announced the return of Iron Man in a high-profile manner. Naturally, some people are happy that Stark is safe and sound, and some are sad. Then, Banner, a top physicist, suffered great changes in his body due to excessive gamma radiation. And because of childhood psychological trauma, Banner has another personality inside him. Hulk was inspired by this. Hulk wreaked havoc in his first appearance. The Air Force Base laboratory located in the desert was almost demolished by him with his bare hands. At the edge of the classroom, Luya leaned lazily against the wall. The sunshine outside the window was just right, and Luya enjoyed such a peaceful time. Superman, Man of Steel, unlocking degree, 24%. Superman, Man of Steel, unlocking degree, 25%. With the unlock level increased by 1%. Luya could feel that an indescribable energy was reacting in his body. His physical strength also increased. At this moment, the watch that had been worn on my wrist suddenly issued a call notification. After dialing the call, Stark's voice came. "Hey Lure, maybe. Sex. I need your help." Stark's voice was very messy, accompanied by his violent breathing and coughing. From what he heard, he must have encountered something difficult. Luya replied directly. "I know, I'll be right away." After saying that, he hung up the call directly. The other side of New York. Stark looked at the hung-up call and murmured. "But I haven't said what happened yet." "Sir." Jarvis's voice came from Mark 6. "Your friend, Mr. Luya support is coming soon. Estimated time, 1 minute." Jarvis was able to draw such a conclusion naturally because he calculated and speculated based on the real-time positioning on the Luya watch. 1 minute, okay. Stark breathed a sigh of relief. As long as Luya arrived, the crisis here would be resolved. Thinking of this, he glanced at Thor, who was lying next to him, unaware of his life or death. There was a look of disgust in his eyes. "That's it, Thor? I thought this alien guy was so powerful, but he was knocked unconscious by a few hugs and throws. Chun-Chun is here to cause trouble." Here, Luya got up directly after hanging up the phone and walked out from the back of the classroom. In 2 seconds, Luya let go of his super hearing and supervision. Then, he locked onto Stark's location. In Luya's eyes, Stark was being crushed and beaten by a green muscle monster. Hulk? Hulk has always been a very special existence in the Marvel world. Mainly, there are too many settings on him. Even an ordinary Hulk can theoretically increase its power infinitely with anger. Of course, this is just theory. On the street, behind Hulk, a similarly green muscular figure crawled out of the rubble. Unlike the Hulk, its body is covered with many reptilian-like scales. Hate. Although its growth rate is completely incomparable to Hulk, in terms of initial strength, it is not inferior to Hulk who just appeared. Seeing that Stark looked a little unable to hold on, Luya stopped watching the show. With a boom sound, the speed of Mach 10 was fully opened. Is it thundering? No way, there aren't even a few clouds in the sky, how can there be thunder? Peter looked out the window with envy. He knew that the person who could cause such a movement must be his brother. However, Peter is a good boy, even though he is no longer a child. Sir, the lure is about to arrive. Jarvis accurately calculated the arrival time of the lure and reported it to Stark in real time. Estimated 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Boom. A strong shockwave came, followed by an explosion of thunder. In the sky, the pilots of several helicopters flying off the ground only felt a strong wind roaring around them. Oh. Fuck. General Ross, who was observing the battle situation, saw the lure coming out of the dust with his own eyes. And after slowing down the picture taken by the high-speed camera in front of him, he saw the scene of the lure falling from the sky. What's going on? First Banner, then Emil, and finally the one who can fly. Emil is hate and a product of gamma radiation. General Ross. At this time, Stark's channel suddenly connected. Evacuate your men and leave the rest to us. In fact, it was left to the lure, but Stark felt that it was more honorable to put it this way. After hearing Stark's words, Ross didn't think too much. Directly command helicopters and tanks to leave. He also knows that although modern weapons are powerful, they are too slow for Hulk and Abomination. However, what happened this time was actually mainly due to hatred. The appearance of Hulk was actually influenced by Banner's kind personality and came to the rescue. As for whether General Ross has the intention to kill Hulk and Abomination in one fell swoop, it is unknown. Looking at Hulk with crazy hatred on his face, and obviously quite angry, Luya stepped forward and first rescued Stark, who was beaten violently. At this time, Stark's Mark 6 armor had become tattered. Apparently gold and titanium can't withstand the double whammy of Hulk and Abomination. Tony, how did it happen? If I remember correctly, the battle between Hulk and Abomination. Hulk should be here to save the day, right? How come it was Stark who got beaten? Hearing Luya's doubts, Stark pulled off the visor that had become tattered. Then, he looked at Sol helplessly. It's not this guy. I started taunting him, but I was beaten unconscious. It makes me face these two big guys alone. Stark felt extremely wronged. When he received Fury's request for help, he said he just wanted to deal with the hatred. As a result, Hulk, who was obviously supposed to be a helper, also beat him up. How? Are you no longer a human being inside and out? After listening to Stark's explanation, Luya smiled and shook his head. Okay, Tony, get some rest. Episode 63. Makes headlines. Walk between the Hulk and the Abomination. Luya raised his head and looked at the huge amounts of their bodies, and suddenly felt some inexplicable discomfort in his heart. With his legs slightly bent, Luya's body floated up until he looked down at the two of them. I feel comfortable now. Seeing that Luya actually had the ability to fly, there was a look of disbelief in Hate's eyes. He is different from Hulk. Although hatred looks similar to Hulk, he retains his own intelligence. What, are you? Isn't this unreasonable? Tisk. The corners of Luya's eyes twitched. Why don't you ask yourself what it is? People are not humans, ghosts are not ghosts. Ugly. The so-called lie is not a sharp knife, the truth is a sharp knife. Abomination is angry. It is really angry. Because, he himself also knows that he is really ugly now. I'll shoot you to death. Hatred's eyes turned red, and while his feet stamped the ground furiously, he slapped the lure with his palms together. Judging from Abomination's current strength, even a tank cannot withstand his power. Seeing the lure floating in the air without dodging, General Ross had a puzzled look on his face. What, he is, waiting to die? Don't blame him for thinking that. Not even Stark's suit can withstand the power of the Abomination and the Hulk. However, Stark's expression did not change much. He had already faced off against Hulk and Abomination, and thought it wouldn't be a big problem for them to deal with the lure. This is also true. Faced with the hateful slaps of his palms, Luya just opened his arms. In an instant, his hands were inserted into the hateful palms. Roar. The severe pain from both palms made hatred scream to the sky. But before he could make any other move, he only felt huge amounts of pulling force coming from his arms. Woohoo! The sound of breaking wind sounded in my ears, and I bowed my head in disgust. I only saw that the ground was getting further and further away from me. After a few seconds, Luya stopped rising with hatred. Immediately afterwards, an even more violent force dived toward the ground with hatred. When they reached the ground, there was even a sonic boom around the two of them. Boom! Abomination was the first to be smashed into the ground by Luya. Huge amounts of shock waves spread along the street, and even the buildings next to it shook. Luya stood up. Abomination, who was smashed deeply into the ground, was already limp and completely unconscious. Well? General Ross at the command post looked at the scene in front of him, and the corners of his mouth moved, but he didn't say anything. However, he looked at Luya in an invincible posture, and then at Hulk, who was obviously afraid of Luya. The world has changed so much. Perhaps I should agree to their plan. General Ross knows very well that it is difficult to threaten these superhumans using ordinary methods. If you can't beat him, then join in. General Ross's mind began to tilt, and he was already inclined to use gamma rays to strengthen himself. Daily Bugle. Oh, Peter. You always bring me countless surprises. Editor-in-Chief Jameson took a few photos from Peter's hand. The above pictures were of the Hulk vs. Abomination incident that happened in the neighborhood yesterday. In order to earn tuition, Peter has recently been working part-time at the Daily Bugle for some time. As for the way to get this job, of course it is to take a picture of yourself as Spider-Man. Yesterday, after Luya left, after thinking about it, Peter still left the classroom. It can only be said that Luya made some mistakes in judging Peter's character. This time, Ben did not die, plus the subtle influence of Luya. Until now, Peter is no longer the Blacken, he is just a bully who throws ashes in your eyes. Well, at least not entirely. Here, Thompson is naturally happy that Peter can get a first-hand photo of Spider-Man every time. Of course, Jameson at this period did not like Spider-Man, and believed that Spider-Man's behavior was also a crime. Looking at the stack of photos in his hand, although Jameson was already happy in his heart, he remained calm on the surface. Iron Man vs. Hulk and Abomination. What a hot topic. However, Jameson noticed that although Iron Man was in the photo, the picture given was incorrect. Instead, another guy whose face can't be seen clearly, together with Hulk's own hatred, occupies most of the photo. This figure is naturally Luya. Peter will send these photos with Luya's permission. It won't be long before Thanos arrives. Especially Luya is not sure about the Thanos of this universe and how far he has progressed in collecting gems. So, before Odin died of old age, you can either gain the power to crush Thanos, or you can gather a team and defeat Thanos as a team. Luya decided to make these two choices at the same time. Therefore, he acquiesced to Peter publishing his back in the Daily Bugle. Perhaps it's time for Homelander to appear in the public eye. Not to mention developing quietly. If Thanos collects all the Infinity Stones, just snap his fingers. Luya didn't dare to bet on whether he would survive in that half of the universe. As a result, the Daily Bugle reported that the Mysterious Man and Iron Man teamed up to fight Hulk and Abomination, occupying the entire page. At the same time, Iron Man issued a statement. As a result, the name Motherland appeared in the public eye for the first time. At home. Ben Parker is still reading the newspaper every day. In the past few months, New York has changed so much that it exceeded his imagination. People with super abilities such as Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, and Hulk emerge endlessly. In the past 2 days, another native of the Motherland has appeared. By the way, Ben frowned and stared at the photos on the page. The headline page is the scene where the lore is floating in the air, confronting Hulk and Abomination at the same time. Although I didn't take a frontal photo of the lore, I still felt quite puzzled. Strange, this native of the Motherland. Why does his back look so much like a lore? Ben rubbed his eyes and looked more and more like him. Especially the clothes of the Motherland. Ben remembered that he saw Luya wearing exactly the same thing yesterday. Tall and strong body, golden hair, same clothes. Well, for Ben, who is familiar with his son, he can identify so many characteristics. The so-called native of the Motherland should be his son Luya. However, it was precisely because he was familiar with his son that Ben felt confused. This kid, he hasn't shown anything strange since he was a child, right? Even if the body is strong, it is still within the normal range. Now he doesn't look like a normal human being. Why don't you wait until Luya comes back and ask? Why do you have to guess here? May didn't mind her son's identity. In her opinion, if Luya is really a native of the motherland, she will definitely be proud of her son. Episode 64. Peter's Troubles. Daily Bugle. In the editor's office, Jameson had a gray cigar in one hand, his eyes slightly squinted, and his expression looked like he was enjoying himself. It's no wonder that after Peter's photo of him was published in the newspaper yesterday, Stark unexpectedly issued a statement at the same time. As a result, the people of the motherland became a hot spot in New York and even the entire America overnight. Then yesterday's Daily Bugle newspaper naturally became a hit. At this time, the office door was gently pushed open. A young man who looked a little dull walked in. The young man is none other than the Daily Bugle's hero, Peter Parker. As an intern employee who has only been here for a few weeks, Peter has already contributed a lot to the Daily Bugle. There are a lot of close-up photos of Spider-Man, as well as the back photos of the people of the motherland that I brought yesterday. Oh, little Peter. Jameson actually showed a rare smile to Peter today, which made Peter feel a little flattered. And it was precisely because of this smile that Peter gained more confidence for his next request. Good morning, Mr. Jameson. Peter had a shy smile on his face. People in New York would not have thought that the reliable Spider-Man in their eyes was actually a shy young man. Peter, have you brought any new photos today? As he spoke, Jameson looked at Peter expectantly. Looking at Jameson, Peter scratched his head awkwardly. That's right, Mr. Jameson. As for the photos of the people of the motherland, if I have the opportunity to take them, I will definitely bring them to you as soon as possible. Peter promised. But in fact, Peter is a little afraid of Luya now. This is not the fear of the weak when facing the strong, but the lack of confidence of the weak when facing those with strong hearts. Moreover, Peter also knows the importance of the matter. He will not make his brother's photo public to the public without Luya's permission. However, upon hearing that Peter did not bring any photos this time, the smile on Jameson's face slowly disappeared. So, Peter, you came here empty-handed? Listening to Jameson's emotionless voice, Peter felt like cold sweat was almost dripping from his head. That's right, Mr. Jameson. He could only admit it. Then what are you still doing here, Peter? Jameson issued an eviction order. In fact, Jameson doesn't hate Peter. The reason for this cold attitude towards Peter is entirely because of the unknown relationship between Peter and Spider-Man, which led to Jameson's hatred in the house. Jameson is filled with disgust for Spider-Man for various complicated reasons. For example, I don't agree with Spider-Man's identity as a hero, and I feel that only public officials are the real heroes. For example, family experience made Jameson distrustful of guys wearing masks. For other reasons, Jameson formed a prejudice against Spider-Man, and at the same time, he became a little colder towards Peter. However, Peter thought about his purpose of coming today, so he bit the bullet and spoke to Jameson with difficulty. That's right, Mr. Jameson. I would like to give you an advance of this month's salary. Peter finally spoke. The main thing is that although the semester has just started, the expenses in college life are really not small. And Peter is unwilling to ask for money from his brother Luya, let alone his Uncle Ben and Aunt May. Of course, the reason why Peter was short of money was actually because Mary Jane and Harry broke up. The reason why the two broke up is more complicated. In addition to Harry's father's disapproval, Jane and Harry's personalities are actually quite incompatible. The poverty of her family and the coldness of family relationships made it difficult for Mary Jane to get along with Harry, the rich man. And this gave Peter hope. To be honest, if Peter borrowed money from Luya for this reason, Luya would really not lend it. There are no women in the world anymore? Do we have to hang ourselves by staring at Mary Jane? But the innocent Peter just likes the Mary Jane one, and there is nothing he can do about it. This is why Peter bit the bullet and came to Jameson to advance his salary today. After listening to Peter's appeal, Jameson suddenly widened his eyes, as if he had heard some terrible news. His body leaned forward slightly and said, "Young man, are you kidding me? If everyone is like you and comes to me to advance their salary, then the newspaper will collapse sooner or later." Jameson's rejection was expected by Peter, and he had been prepared before coming. But he still wanted to give it a try, so he said. But Mr. Jameson, in the past half-month, I think I have made a lot of contributions to the newspaper. Peter's eyes were firm this time. In order to meet the goddess Mary Jane, he was willing to risk everything. Seeing Peter's persistence, Jameson's expression softened. 1. Peter is right. In the past half-month, the popularity of the photos taken by Peter alone is equal to that of all other reporters. Secondly, Jameson also understands that although he hates Spider-Man, he should not be overly involved with a young man like Peter. So, Jameson stared at Peter for more than 10 seconds, and then said slowly. Okay, little Peter. I will make an exception today and give you an advance of 1 month's salary. But you have to remember to take more photos of people from the motherland recently. Jameson didn't care if Peter could take photos of his native country, or how difficult it would be. In his opinion, if Peter can photograph the people of his motherland once, he can photograph them countless times. On Peter's side, Peter was even stunned for a moment when he heard that Jameson actually agreed to his request. Then, he asked Jameson curiously. Speaking of Mr. Jameson, do you also think that the people of the motherland are superheroes who save everyone from danger? Jameson's expression froze, and he laughed as if he heard some funny joke. Superhero? Are you saying that the man who destroyed this country, who destroyed a whole street of buildings, is a superhero? Stop joking. He's the same as Spider-Man. And that Spider-Woman. No. Jameson jumped up from the boss's chair. He's more evil than Spider-Man. The greater the ability, the greater the destructive power. Jameson's words were like a machine gun, making the stupid Peter unable to react for a moment. He was still a little confused until he walked out of the office with a meager salary. Brother, like me, are both disruptors of social order? Impossible. Peter shook his head. Obviously he has been fighting crime, how can he be someone who disrupts social order? Episode 65. The Love of Relatives. On the way home, Peter was still recalling the words of editor Jameson. In fact, Peter knows that the outside world's evaluation of himself and Gwen is quite polarized. Just like Jameson said, many people believe that the existence of Spider-Man has also caused considerable damage while fighting crime. Peter himself admitted this. After all, sometimes he would destroy some buildings in order to save people. From here, Peter thought of his brother Luya again. In fact, Peter himself has been avoiding a question. That is, when brother Luya faces a crime, he often kills him. This is what Peter thinks. This is actually completely contrary to Uncle Ben's teachings. Looking back on this now, it was exactly what troubled Peter. How do you say that you kill people to save others? Is it justice or another crime? In fact, if it were a lure, there would never be this doubt. No matter whether you are righteous or not, strength is justice. Those who die by their own hands are the villains. In Peter's distress, he slowly returned home. The door opened and what greeted me was my Aunt, May. May could tell at a glance that something was wrong with Peter's mood. Why, dear Peter, you don't look very happy? May gently took Peter's arm and led him back into the house. Ben has just finished his work outside today and is drinking tea on the chair. Seeing his nephew Peter's unhappy look, he straightened up slightly and said, Peter, it's normal to have a lot of worries at your age. For example, friendship and love, I remember the same thing back then. At this point, Ben suddenly paused, glanced at his wife May Empress next to him, who was staring at him eagerly, and then changed his words. Well, anyway, while everyone is here, you can tell us your troubles. We are family, right? Beside, Luya, who was basking in the sun, lazily opened one eye and then closed it again. It's nothing more than love, isn't it, brother? Luya also knew about Mary Jane and Harry's breakup. After all, Harry was one of the few friends of his younger brother Peter, and the two often walked together. Luya could also see the incompatibility between Mary Jane and Harry's personalities. After hearing his brother Luya reveal his little thoughts, Peter temporarily put aside his previous worries and showed a shy look on his face. Okay, so that's it. Peter, I guess liking a girl is not something to be ashamed of. Ben looked at Peter with a slight smile. Let me guess, is it Mary Jane from next door? Peter never knew that his Uncle Ben would be such a gossip. But, as Ben said, when he was young, he was also a romantic young man and experienced many things. Just like May, Ben looked at his wife with loving eyes. When she was young, May was also a great beauty. After being fed a mouthful of dog food, Peter shrugged helplessly. However, in his heart, he was somewhat dissatisfied with the love of the older generation. No disrespect to uncle and aunt. Rather, the impetuous society has infinitely magnified the role of money. In Peter's opinion, how can one fall in love without money? That's why Peter even thought of taking a salary advance today. He and Mary Jane made an arrangement to go to the opera house to watch a performance together in the evening. Ticket fees and clothing all cost money. Thinking of this, Peter became more and more dejected. May seemed to see something and comforted softly. Of course, kid, dating a girl does cost a fortune sometimes. As she said that, she picked up her wallet from the side and counted out 500 yuan from it. After thinking about it, she took out all the 900 yuan in her wallet. Dividing out 450 yuan and handing it to Peter, May smiled and said, "Maybe it's not enough, but I hope it can give you some help. The conditions at home are actually not that good." Although Luya is rich, whenever Luya expresses his desire to support his family, he is always firmly rejected by Ben. And Peter is not willing to use money to hurt family ties. Therefore, he could only quietly arrange for his father's boss outside to arrange some easy and decent work for his father to do. Peter accepted more than 400 yuan from Aunt May. Although he was quite ashamed, he still accepted it for the evening date. "I will definitely earn a lot of money in the future to honor my uncle and aunt." After handing the money to Peter, May walked towards the lure again with a smile. "Mom, you know, I'm not very short of money." Luya, who was leisurely basking in the sun, stood up from the lounge chair and looked at his mother May with a bit of laughter. He knows that his mother is always very careful and strives to treat everyone equally with her love at home and not to hurt everyone in the family. Therefore, after supporting Peter with more than 400 yuan, she will definitely ask Luya to accept the money. May just smiled kindly and patted Luya's shoulder, which was much taller and broader than her. "I know, Luya. But this is a mother's love for her child. Do you want to reject this too?" As she said that, May deliberately kept a straight face. It seemed as if Luya would become angry as long as she refused again. "Love you, Mom." After saying that, Luya hugged his mother gently. At this time, a subtle sound of complaining came. "God, I don't even have such treatment." May turned around and looked. Her husband was drinking tea seriously. Of course Ben could not be jealous of his nephew and son. Although life is sometimes difficult, Ben is quite strong and he is not willing to ask his wife for money no matter how difficult it is. The laughter spread from home and spread far away. However, although Peter's expression was smiling, it still contained a hint of bitterness. Next door to the Parker family, Mary Jane's family is preparing lunch. Of course, when they say they are a family, they are actually just two people, Mary Jane and her mother, Madeline. Because Mary Jane's father was often domestically violent when Jane was a child, Jane's mother, Madeline, divorced him. Hearing the laughter next door, Mary Jane and Madeline had a little sadness on their faces. For nothing else. At this time, Watson, Jane's father and Madeline's husband, was sitting opposite the two of them. Watson smelled of alcohol and looked at his wife and daughter. He shouted loudly, "I'm only short of 20,000 yuan. Give it to me, and I'll leave immediately." Watson was good at gambling, but this time he owed too much money, so he decided to go to his ex-wife. Looking at their drunken father, Jane and Madeline recalled their original fears. Episode 66. Retreat. In fact, it makes no sense for Watson to come here to ask for money. Because Madeline is no longer his wife. Soon, the movement here also spread to the next door. Ben also knew something about Mary Jane's father's tendency to domestic violence. After all, this is not the first time Watson has come to make trouble with his ex-wife. "You guys wait here, I'll be right back." Ben's sense of justice does not allow him to remain indifferent to this matter. "Dad, I will go with you too." This time, before Luya could say anything, Peter stood up first. Regarding the matter of Mary Jane being bullied, if it were in the past, he really wouldn't have any good solution. But now that he has become Spider-Man, Peter will stop him no matter what. Besides, Uncle Ben is already old. If he is hurt by Watson, a drunkard. Of course, in reality, such a thing is impossible. With the lure here, as long as Watson has even the slightest tendency to be detrimental to Ben, the lure will shoot his head off in an instant. Looking at Peter, who can't wait to stand up for the mother and daughter next door. Ben and May looked at each other and smiled. They also noticed Peter's changes. Peter thought his identity as Spider-Man was perfect. But in fact, getting stronger is the details that are inadvertently shown in life. Both made Ben and May have some uncertain guesses in their minds, but they were willing to believe Peter and didn't ask. Jane's home. Because Madeline insisted on refusing to pay Watson 20,000 yuan, Watson's temper became increasingly violent. Drunk and cowardly, Watson did not dare to act arrogant in front of others, but when faced with his ex-wife, who was used to being bullied by him, he was extremely domineering. Madeline. Watson banged his fist on the table, making a pong sound. You know, if I don't get the money today, I will never leave. So, it would be better for you and me to take out the money as soon as possible. After the rage, Watson pulled up a chair and sat on it. Madeline looked increasingly helpless as she looked at her ex-husband's rogue appearance. Not to mention Mary Jane. The shadow of her childhood was brought back again, and her body trembled slightly. Dong dong dong. At this time, there was a knock on the door. Mrs. Madeline, are you at home? When they heard Ben's voice next door, Madeline and Jane felt inexplicably relieved. They knew Ben's character very well. As long as he came, he would never ignore their affairs. On the contrary, Watson's face became even more serious. The door opened and Ben and Peter stood at the door together. Mrs. Madeline, may I ask, have you encountered any difficulties? As he spoke, Ben looked at Watson, who was sitting in the back, holding a beer bottle and staring at this side. Peter looked at Jane nestling next to Madeline and winked at her. Peter is no longer the little Peter he once was. Anyway, in everyone's eyes, even though they don't know the identity of Peter Spider-Man. But barely being able to touch Thompson, a former football player at the school, can already prove his strength. Moreover, Peter's body is now quite strong. So Watson wisely gave in. Who are you? How can you just enter someone's home? As he spoke, he put down the bottle he was using to show off. If you can't beat someone, just be reasonable. This is Watson's rule of survival. Otherwise, he would not have thought of the bad idea of coming to his ex-wife's house to ask for money. Really? Ben stretched out his hand to stop Peter, who was eager to step forward. For Ben, his first choice for resolving conflicts must not be violence. Whether it's hurting others or being hurt by others. Especially since Peter is still his nephew, he is even more reluctant. Ben stared at Watson, who looked a little nervous, then looked at Madeline and continued. Mrs. Madeline, who is this? Of course Ben knew that Watson was Madeline's ex-husband, and he asked that on purpose. Madeline understood what Ben meant in an instant and said firmly. I didn't know that he suddenly broke into my home and robbed our mother and daughter. After taking Madeline's words, Ben looked at Watson with a serious expression. Sir, I'm afraid it's you who should leave here. It is a serious crime to break into someone else's home without permission. Facing Ben's threat, Watson first looked at his ex-wife and daughter with cold eyes. Then he looked at Ben and Peter. He was weighing whether it was possible for him to get a sum of money from his ex-wife. But obviously, Watson, who has been drinking for a long time, let alone the young and strong Peter. Even Ben, who was already very old, was not sure he could beat him. Snort. Thinking of this, Watson reluctantly snorted. Mr. Ben, right? He glanced at Ben. I think you should focus on your wife, instead of meddling in other women's houses. After saying that, he immediately prepared to leave. There's definitely no money to be made here anyway, so it's better to leave as soon as possible. Maybe you can find a way to get some money elsewhere. However, facing Watson's insult to Ben, Peter couldn't get angry and took a step directly. If Ben hadn't stopped him, he might have revealed his long-hidden identity and beat up Watson. Peter. Ben pulled Peter's shoulders tightly. He was surprised by Peter's strength. The moment he held Peter, he was almost carried away. After taking a look at Watson, Ben said earnestly. Assault is not a small crime. You are still in school, Peter. If he were young, even Ben himself would have been unable to help but rush forward and beat Watson up. But he is not. He is now the head of a family of 4, so naturally he cannot act impulsively. That's okay, Uncle Ben. Peter looked at Watson, who had run away, sighed, and reluctantly loosened his clenched fists. When Watson's back disappeared in the distance, Madeline gradually recovered from her fear. He looked at Ben gratefully. Mr. Ben, thank you so much. If it weren't for your help, I don't know what I would have done. Ben waved his hand. Easy to do. I guess after this time, that guy won't dare to come here again. Ben was thinking that he should pay attention to the next door recently. If Watson dares to come again, I will never be polite to him next time. Back home, my wife May is preparing some refreshments. However, Luya, who was basking in the sun just now, disappeared, leaving only the deck chair still shaking back and forth. May, where did Luya go? Oh, he said, go out to buy something and we'll be back soon. Episode 67. I have not forgiven you. Watson became increasingly angry after leaving his ex-wife's home. Sex. This time I didn't get any money, but I still had to pay for the round trip. It's all that bitch's fault. And the nosy old guy. While cursing and walking, Watson suddenly found a shadow appearing in front of him. Who? You don't watch the road? Watson looked up and saw a tall young man with blonde hair. The young man's body looked quite tall and strong, and Watson immediately lost the intention to continue speaking harshly. Cough. As if nothing was wrong, Watson took the initiative to move a few steps aside, preparing to leave the blonde young man behind. Only. No matter whether Watson goes left or right, no matter how many steps he takes, the blonde young man is always in front of him. At this time, Watson finally knew that the other party was coming for him. Watson. Luya narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Watson condescendingly. I should have just punched you to death, but now I changed my mind. After insulting his father, there was no way he could let go of Watson so easily. That's right, Luya felt that killing Watson with one punch would be a painless relief for him. Know who I am? Luya's voice was cold, as if the surrounding air was freezing. Watson shook his head in confusion. Luya continued. I am Ben Parker's son, Luya Parker. Now, do you understand? A drop of cold sweat slipped from Watson's forehead as he felt the young man standing in front of him. His momentum and murderous intent were countless times stronger than those of the bosses of underground casinos he had seen. Yes, I'm sorry. Watson's talent for bullying showed off, and he tremblingly apologized to Luya. He even bent his legs and knelt down in front of Luya without hesitation. Watson knew in his heart that the other party blocked him in this small alley with few pedestrians, and he definitely had murderous intentions. He begged the lure. Sorry. I'm leaving New York right now. I'll never come back. Yes. Yes. Never come back again. Obviously, Luya's murderous expression caused Watson some bad memories in the casino. Looking at Luya's still indifferent eyes, Watson felt that he might not have said enough, so he continued. Your father also thinks that violence is not the best way to solve problems. Right? Give me a chance. Watson was begging for mercy at this time, and even secretly laughed at his own wit. Able to detect the opponent's murderous intent and quickly beg for mercy. The corners of Luya's mouth raised slightly. You are right, violence is indeed not the best way to solve the problem. At this time, there were pedestrians passing by the alley. After seeing what was happening in the alley, he left in a hurry. I forgive you once, for my father. Luya said softly. You go. Then he moved out of the way. Seeing that Luya was really willing to let him go, Watson felt happy for a while. He hurriedly walked around the lure, staying far away in order not to run into it. Thump thump thump. Just after he ran out a few steps, the eyes of Luya standing behind him gathered red light, and a lot of heat energy gathered. Wow. In the alley, 2 red lights flashed past. Watson is still running forward. Suddenly, he felt the world around him spinning. And then, there was no more. Luya turned off his laser eyes and turned back silently to leave. I didn't say I forgive you. It is true that violence is not the best way to solve problems. But for Luya, it is an easy and quick way. Passing a pizza shop, Luya stopped. 2 pizzas, a sausage, and a pineapple, take away. This pizza shop is where Peter used to work. The store is not big and the pizza is not very famous. The only good thing is that they make pizza very quickly. Carrying 2 pizzas in his hands and basking in the sun, Luya returned home. I'm back. After saying that, Luya placed the still steaming pizza on the table. Oh Luya, actually my apple pie is almost ready, you don't need to spend any money. May felt a little sad about the cost of the lure. In her opinion, a handsome young man like her son Luya must spend a lot of money in college. For example, various club activities, dating with girlfriends, etc. May knew how lethal a handsome young man like her son could be to those young girls. So you can actually save some money at home. Of course, May is also very happy about her son's filial piety. Ben, stop looking at it. Come and divide the pizza. I'll go take a look at my apple pie. Come here, you can't let me rest for a while. Although he said this, Ben also had a smile on his face. Let me help you, Mom. With that said, Luya wanted to enter the kitchen. Lua, just wait and see. The apple pie isn't enough for 2 people yet. May smiled and refused her son's help. Everyone is happy except Peter. He sat aside, with a somewhat troubled expression on his face. Young man, what's wrong? Ben noticed Peter's condition and sat next to him. You seem a little depressed since your brother came in just now? Feeling his uncle's concern, Peter forced a smile and said. It's nothing, Uncle Ben, It's just a little uncomfortable. As he said that, Peter looked at Luya. Brother, can you help me back to my room? Peter's excuse was still so lame. May believed it, leaned out of the kitchen, and asked with concern. Peter, if you're not feeling well, I think we'd better see a doctor. Peter scratched his head and replied. It's okay. Maybe I'm too tired. Just go to the room and rest for a while. After saying that, he looked at Luya again. Brother, can you help me? May wanted to say something else, but Ben said first. Peter, please take care of yourself. If you feel very uncomfortable, you must tell us. After saying that, he winked at May. It was obvious that the nephew, who was already a young man, did not want their 2 elders to know some things. Seeing Peter's worried look, Luya nodded. Let's go. In the room, Peter's eyes flickered, as if he was thinking about how to speak. If you have anything to say, just say it. Luya is sitting on a chair by the window, where the sun is shining. Seeing his brother acting like nothing was wrong, Peter hesitated and said. I smell the blood on you, brother. Did you kill that man? Episode 68. The defense is broken. Seeing Peter's tangled look, Luya couldn't help but think. Is it at this stage that Peter has not matured yet? As his younger brother, Luya has also been subtly influencing Peter since childhood. But obviously, it's of no use. If Peter could just question himself decisively because of his own methods, maybe Luya will be a little happier. Rather than like now, Peter would feel that what his brother did was wrong based on his own values. But in person, he hesitated and couldn't even question him. Peter. Luya's voice sounded very plain, making it impossible to hear what he was thinking right now. Hesitation, is this how you will grow after becoming Spider-Man? Don't you think that you missed too many things because of your hesitation? Luya decided to use a special method to promote Peter's growth. Even if it brings some bad effects, it doesn't matter. Luya believes that he has the ability to know the truth. To be honest, Peter should actually have matured a lot during this period. But because his father was saved by himself, Spider-Man lost the thing that had the greatest impact on him in his life. Hearing that his brother was the first to question him, Peter finally raised his head and replied. You won't go wrong if you think more about it, right? This is what Peter thought at first. When faced with a problem, he always thinks a lot and strives not to make mistakes. However, the more you think about it, the more mistakes you make sometimes. Luya leaned towards Peter and said with a slightly mocking tone. Yeah? Like when you think about it more, Mary Jane becomes Thompson's girlfriend? You know, Jane lives next door to us. This sentence was a bit heartbreaking, and for a moment, Peter began to stutter. She. After talking for a long time, Peter couldn't say a complete sentence. However, Luya did not let Peter go because of his concession. Instead, he asked more vigorously. So after Mary Jane broke up with Thompson, you thought about it a lot? And Jane ends up with your good friend Harry? Peter felt like Luya's voice was like countless sharp knives piercing his head. But unfortunately, he really couldn't find a reason to refute. Stop talking, brother. Please. Peter held his head and spoke to Luya in a begging tone. As for the question he wanted to ask Luya at the beginning, he had long forgotten it. At this time, Peter just wanted his brother Luya to let him go and stop mentioning these things. However, looking at his brother who lowered his head and did not dare to look at him, the corners of Luya's mouth raised. Honestly, Peter. You are so weak. Look at our family, who is like you? Luya was right. Whether it is Ben or May, although they are older, their strength of character is real. Luya didn't stop, with a playful tone, he got closer and closer to Peter. You say. If I pursue Jane, how long will it take to win her over? A week? Or one day? Hearing Luya's question, Peter was stunned for a moment. Then, he raised his head in disbelief. No, brother, you won't do this, right? Listening to Peter's almost pleading voice, Luya's smile seemed to get deeper. Why not? Perhaps you can think more and consider it more. No. Peter's expression changed. He had already agreed to go on a date with Jane that evening. If my brother had a hand in. Luya. You can't do this. Peter almost yelled this sentence. Downstairs, Ben and May also heard the noise upstairs. May looked at the ceiling with some worry. Where was Peter's room? Ben, they won't fight, right? Hearing his wife's worries, Ben helped her arm. Don't worry. There will always be a period when young people have bad tempers. Luya and Peter are both good boys, we should trust them. Ben wanted to believe that his son and nephew could handle the conflict well. This is because of the calmness Luya has shown since childhood and the kindness of Peter. Upstairs, the quarrel continued. You already have so much, I only have Jane. You can't take her away. Peter had stood up, his fists clenched tightly. It can be seen that he is very excited now. However, the smile on Luya's face was even more exaggerated. So what? Peter? Who is Jane to you? Why can't I take her away? How about you give me a reason? Although Peter was quite angry and even showed strength that he had never had before, Luya was actually very happy. In the world of Marvel, being indecisive is definitely not a good quality. Even if it is reckless, it is better than hesitating and missing opportunities at critical moments. On Peter's side, when he heard that his brother seemed to be really robbing Jane from him and not joking, he moved. With great force, Peter punched the lure. Although Peter knew that his strength was far behind Luya, he really couldn't help it anymore. Boom! In midair, Peter's fist was grasped by Luya, preventing him from making any progress. Brother, you know, aside from my strength, I have a lot of assets. And do you have these? You're a coward and you don't have money, how can you expect Jane to fall in love with you? Base. Peter suddenly retracted his fist. His eyes turned cold. Luya, I also have extraordinary abilities. I will prove to you that I am no worse than you. It seems like Peter has made up his mind? Then I'll wait and see. Luya responded easily. Peter turned his head and looked from the window to the next door, which was facing Jane's room. With the spider ability, he actually has pretty good eyesight. Even if it couldn't be like Luya's supervision, there was no problem in seeing Jane's room clearly. At this time, Peter could see that Jane was choosing various dresses, seemingly preparing for a date in the evening. Call. Taking a long breath, Peter had something to think about. Picked up the coat on the bed. As soon as he put on half of the cuffs, he showed a look of disgust on his face, and then threw the coat on the ground. He used to like this solid color coat and has been wearing it for 2 years. But now it seems that it is too rustic. I can buy a better one. Peter thought of his friend Harry and his father. Maybe I should buy a suit for my date with Jane. Thinking of this, Peter immediately set off to go out. Seeing Peter walking downstairs with his head held high, Luya couldn't help it anymore and laughed out loud. Very good, brother. Episode 69. Bully. Peter went downstairs, dong dong dong, all the way from the second floor, and then ran out the door without saying a word. Bang! Listening to the huge amounts of door closing, Ben and May looked at each other in confusion. Then, May looked at her husband with some reproach. I just said, we should have gone up and had a look just now. Ben was a little embarrassed at this time. Fortunately, his peripheral vision caught Luya, who was slowly walking downstairs. Lore. He quickly asked. You and Peter, were you arguing upstairs just now? I originally thought the brothers had quarreled, but seeing Luya's smiling look, I wasn't so sure. Of course not, Dad. Peter just needs to go out and take care of some things, don't worry. With that said, Luya walked to the dining table. Looking at the steaming apple pie, he picked up one, blew on it, and took a bite. Mom, the apple pie you made is delicious. Hearing Luya say that there was no conflict between the two, the couple also breathed a sigh of relief. May looked at her son's appearance, smiled, and pushed the plate with apple pie in front of Luya. Eat slowly, be careful not to burn it. If you put it this far, I can't reach it. Ben whispered next to him. Then, looking at his wife's eyes towards him, he ran towards the kitchen with a smile. There's also an apple pie, right? I'll serve it. After enjoying afternoon tea at home, Luya unlocked supervision and superhearing and locked Peter's position. After all, if Peter was too stimulated by him and did something extreme, he could stop him in time. Daily Bugle? Let me think about it. Why does Peter want to go to the Daily Bugle? Daily Bugle, editor's office. Jameson is writing the manuscript. Suddenly, the office door was pushed open, and Peter walked in with a cool look on his face. Sitting down on the chair opposite Jameson, Peter comfortably crossed his legs on the desk. Peter? You are today. Peter's operation actually put Jameson at risk. As a result, his tone of voice was not as confident as usual. Peter rested his head on his arms. Boss, what do you think of the photos I gave you recently? Good? Jameson understood Peter's purpose of coming, which was just to take credit. However, it seems that even though Peter has been here for so long, he has never behaved like this. Peter, what do you want to say? Peter pointed to a newspaper on the table, which showed Lua's back and Stark's front. First. Peter cleared his throat. I have made a lot of contributions to the newspaper. I took almost all the close-up photos of Spider-Man. I'm the only one who can take the first shot of Spider-Man. Jameson looked at Peter calmly and asked. So? So I think I should go straight from internship to full-time job. And I think my salary should be increased. That's all Peter wanted. In a coffee shop in the distance, Luya withdrew his gaze, a little confused. Strange, the venom should be on Thompson, right? Luya looked at Peter again. This time, he used the ability of perspective. Under the clairvoyance ability, Luya saw something was wrong with Peter. A small piece of black liquid is squirming, as if it is slowly waking up. Venom? Were other symbiotes decomposed from venom? Staring at the black symbiote, Luya wanted to find an opportunity to send a laser eye to send it to ashes. But before that, this might also be a change in Peter's way, isn't it? In the office, after hearing Peter's request, Jameson still refused. Peter, you are still a student, how could it be possible for you to become a regular student so quickly? It's not a big deal to become a regular employee, but Jameson doesn't want to open this hole, otherwise it will be difficult to determine the rules in the future. Then you never want to receive any close-up photos of Spider-Man again. There was a little murderous look in Peter's eyes. He occasionally sees his brother Luya giving such looks to some people. But now after imitating it myself, it really feels great. Peter doesn't know. In addition to the previous influence of Luya's words on him, the resurrecting symbiote is also amplifying his desires. Jameson looked at Peter, whose eyes were trying to protrude, although he didn't know if there was something wrong with his eyes. But this time doesn't seem to be a good time to care. Okay, Peter. Jameson nodded helplessly. You win. The Daily Bugle has been booming recently, all thanks to the close-up photos of Spider-Man taken by Peter. Now that Peter has threatened him with this, Jameson can't refuse. On the street, Peter holds a handful of banknotes in his hand. It's about 400 to 500 yuan. He twisted his shoulders excitedly, like a proud stallion. Seeing this scene, Luya had to admit that it was a bit eye-catching. Even as a temporary villain, Peter is actually not good at it. Pedestrians on the road looked at Peter's slightly crazy look and took a detour one after another. However, in Peter's eyes, these people were impressed by their strong bodies and radiant charm. At this time, a shopping mall nearby caught Peter's attention. Suit. Big sale. Discount sale. Squeezing the banknotes in his hand, Peter smiled confidently and walked in immediately. Oh no, Peter, this is too. Luya covered his forehead. This is simply unsightly. So being stimulated by myself in this way, my younger brother Peter is still just a. Ask your boss for a promotion and a salary increase. Buy cheap suits. Such a bully? Coming out of the mall, Peter had already put on a new black suit. However, because his body was quite strong at this time, the suit jacket seemed a bit too small for him. But it doesn't matter, Peter is very satisfied. Looking at the people coming and going on the street, Peter felt quite good. Every time he passed a woman, he felt that the other woman was looking at him. As a result, Peter's body began to twist unconsciously and danced the bully dance. Cough. In the distance, Luya coughed lightly. Maybe I should consider leaving the symbiote with Peter? To be honest, even compared to Peter now, Luya feels more like a villain. In which villain, the first thing Blacken does is ask his boss for a promotion and a raise? The reason for the threat turned out to be resignation. He doesn't even want to show force. Is it still necessary to look at him? It was hard for Luya to imagine what bad things Peter could do. The worst, most inhumane bad thing he could think of, maybe taking away a child's lollipop? Episode 70. Fire starts. Night. Peter approached the opera house and looked at the waiter in front of him. He took out the admission ticket from his pocket, flicked it, and it floated into the waiter's hand. Peter was in a good mood at this time, because this was his first official date with Mary Jane. Walking into the theater, the curtain has fallen. Taking advantage of the ambiguous light, Peter found Jane's position and sat next to her. Wow, oh. Jane looked at Peter beside her and felt quite strange. Wear a suit and tie. The hair seems to have been styled with hairspray? Peter, what are you doing today? In fact, Jane is very clear about Peter's feelings for her. However, at the beginning, she was very insecure about everything around her. Now that she is willing to date Peter, she just understands. She was just an ordinary girl, and her breakup with Harry had made her see clearly that rich people would never set their sights on a girl like her. As for Peter, Jane now feels that he is a good fit for her. Seeing Jane smiling at him, Peter also became excited. Soon, the opera began. An actor in a white gauze skirt descended from the sky above the stage, with a melodious voice. Mary Jane gave her full attention to the actress. Becoming a star has always been her dream. Perhaps in Mary Jane's view, becoming an opera star would enable her to enter the upper class. Peter also watched with great interest. Of course, he was not watching the opera, but watching Jane. In the past, he would never have stared at Jane so blatantly. Jane, I believe you will become famous and become a big star in the future. Seeing the sparkle in Jane's eyes, Peter encouraged. Thank you, Peter. Jane turned to look at Peter. At this moment, the blurred lights made the atmosphere ambiguous. Peter's mind suddenly became hot. Looking at Mary Jane, who was so close, he slowly moved his mouth to her. Peter. Jane did not refuse, but narrowed her eyes slightly. Just as the two were about to get close to each other, a voice suddenly came from Peter's right side. Haha, this actress is good. I want her to appear in my bed when it's over. Yes, boss. This sudden conversation directly broke Peter and Jane's interest. Peter turned to look at the person who had just spoken. A middle-aged man with a big belly and a fat brain. And he is also the owner of this opera house. For some reason, a scene suddenly popped up in Peter's mind. The future Mary Jane finally became the big star she wanted to be. Then I was attracted by such a guy, and then... Shut up. Peter stood up from his seat and glared at the middle-aged man who spoke. In an instant, the actress on the stage stopped singing. All eyes of the audience turned to Peter. Peter. Mary Jane tugged on Peter's sleeves awkwardly. In such a gentle occasion as the opera house, such a rude behavior would probably be looked down upon by everyone. Unfortunately, a waiter has already come over. Sorry sir, please get out. Eventually, Peter and Mary Jane were kicked out. It is worth mentioning that the only person who was originally kicked out was Peter. But after something like this happened, it was naturally impossible for Mary Jane to stay in there alone. Jane, I'm sorry. Peter wanted to use some violent means inside. However, whenever this thought arises, he will forcefully suppress it. It doesn't matter, you can go shopping too. Jane smiled and shook her head. Although at first I felt that Peter's behavior just now was a bit rude and not at all in line with his usual behavior. But thinking about the reason for Peter's anger, Jane felt very happy. Isn't this the sense of security you want? Just as the two were about to leave, the opera house suddenly became noisy. Peter opened his eyes and looked, and there seemed to be a red light flashing in the opera house. No, that seems to be firelight? Within a minute, his suspicion was confirmed. A large number of spectators began to rush out of the gate frantically, and behind them, thick smoke began to rise. Then, the fire began to spread, and soon the entire opera house was in flames. How come it suddenly caught fire? Is everyone out yet? Are they all out? Where's the boss? Why don't you see the boss? Your boss? I thought I saw him fall when I ran outside just now. There was a lot of discussion about the cause of the fire in the opera house. It was known that someone had discovered that the owner of the opera house had not yet come out. Looking at the opera house in flames, I heard that some people had not escaped yet. Peter instinctively opened his suit, revealing the Spider-Man suit. But thinking of the boss's insult to the actress, Peter paused and put his hand down again. Peter? What's wrong with you? Mary Jane noticed Peter's abnormality, turned her head and asked. Peter straightened his clothes, flicked his bangs, and said to Jane with a relaxed smile. It's okay, let's go. Anyway, this boss is not a good person, so just let him burn to death inside. Peter didn't realize it yet, but his mentality had changed a lot. Well? Jane looked at Peter with eyes full of surprise. She couldn't believe that the words just now came from Peter's mouth. Peter, are you sick? Saying that, Jane touched Peter's forehead with her hand. Oh, it's okay. Peter gently put down Jane's hand. I feel good. And, I've never felt so good. After saying that, Peter felt more and more happy. Without any explanation, he took Mary Jane's arm and walked toward the front of the street. The fire trucks were roaring in. Peter looked back and saw that the fire in the opera house was very strong. It was estimated that by the time the fire was extinguished, the opera house would have turned into ashes. High in the sky, Luya floats quietly in midair. He did not admire his own handiwork. The owner of the opera house is just an insignificant scumbag, not worthy of his extra attention. Instead, the direction Luya looked at was a bank. At this time, a cash transport truck was parked at its door. In Luya's eyes, he could see it clearly. The sewer cover behind the cash transport truck was suddenly opened, and a large amount of sand poured out from inside. Let me think. What's his name? Marco? Forget it, just call him Sandman. Luya didn't expect that he actually saw the incident of Sandman robbing money. Of course, he had no intention of stopping Sandman. Regardless of Sandman's behavior, good or bad. At least, Sandman's robbery this time was for his family, his daughter.